The dog was half dead when he found it, ribs sharp beneath torn fur, eyes clouded with pain, and breath so shallow it barely stirred the dust. Most folks would have let it go. This was the West, after all, where mercy was expensive and nothing survived without earning it. But the rancher knelt beside the animal, hands rough from years of work, and did what few men still remembered how to do. He offered kindness with no promise of return. No name, no collar, just a body too weak to stand and a trail of dry blood behind it that stretched out toward the canyons. Coyotes had started circling. Buzzards waited nearby. But the rancher, a quiet man named Eli Cooper, wrapped the trembling creature in his coat, placed it gently in his saddlebag, and rode back home as if carrying treasure. He didn't ask where it came from. He just knew it wasn't meant to die alone. He fed the dog broth by candlelight, tended to its wounds with herbs passed down from his mother, and kept a fire burning through 3 long nights. The dog never barked, never whimpered, just watched him with eyes that seemed older than any beast should have, eyes that understood. And on the 4th night, when it finally stood and rested its head against Eli's leg, something in the air changed. The wind shifted, the fire cracked louder, and far off in the distance, the horses began to move. It started as a low thunder, like a heartbeat rolling through the valley. Then came the silhouettes, not shadows, but riders, warriors. 50 horses, strong and silent, their hooves striking the earth in perfect unison. Eli stepped outside, the dog at his side, and watched as they lined the horizon under a moonlit sky. Not a word was spoken, yet every soul present knew. What Eli had saved was not just a stray. It was a sentinel, a messenger, and its life had been tied to something far greater than flesh and bone. This isn't a tale about a man rescuing an animal. It's a story about how the West remembers every act of grace, and how sometimes, when the hour is darkest, the earth sends its warriors not to take, but to thank. What happened next would turn Eli Cooper's ranch into sacred ground, and remind a broken land that nothing done in love is ever forgotten. Stay with me, because this story doesn't just walk, it rides. Eli Cooper had never been a man of many words. He let the land speak for him. The creak of the windmill, the whisper of tall grass, the slow, steady rhythm of hoofbeats across dry dirt. He lived alone, out past Willow Ridge, on a patch of land his grandfather had carved from wilderness with nothing but sweat and stubbornness. Folks respected him, but kept their distance. They said he'd seen too much war, too much grief. And maybe that was true. But Eli still believed in something deeper than luck, in doing right, even when nobody's watching. The day he found the dog, he was fixing a fence near the arroyo. At first, he thought it was a wolf. The body was so still, so broken by whatever storm it had crawled through. But when he got closer, he saw the truth. This was no ordinary mutt. Its fur, though matted and torn, was streaked with markings Eli had never seen before, patterns like paint or war stripes. Its eyes, even dulled by fever, seemed almost human. There was intelligence in them, sorrow too, and something else like remembrance. He took the animal home, not because he expected anything in return, but because he couldn't live with the idea of letting it die alone. That night, as he cleaned the wounds and fed it warm broth from a cracked tin bowl, he noticed strange things, the way the wind shifted around the house, how the cattle didn't make a sound, and how the fire in the hearth burned steady without ever needing more wood. He chalked it up to the cold playing tricks on his senses. But the dog never slept. It watched him all night, alert and silent. On the 3rd day, when the fever broke, Eli was outside, tending to his mare when he heard it, a low growl, not from pain, but from warning. He rushed inside and found the dog standing tall, hackles raised, facing the open window. Eli followed its gaze to the horizon and saw a storm building, but there were no clouds, just dust, and the sound of hooves. Not wild, not frantic, but deliberate, and far more than any herd should have been moving at once. By dusk, they had arrived. 50 riders, dressed in leather and bone, paint across their faces, silence in their posture. Their horses were unlike any Eli had seen, tall, proud, draped in feathers and cloth. They didn't speak. They didn't dismount. They just stood in formation, eyes fixed on the house. The dog stepped forward, out onto the porch, and raise its head, not in fear, but in greeting. And one by one, the riders raised their hands to their chests in salute. Eli didn't move at first. His instincts told him to be cautious, to grab his rifle, to ask questions, to prepare for the worst. But something about the stillness in the air, the respect in the rider's posture, held him. These men weren't here to take. They weren't scouts or bounty hunters or ghosts of old grudges. They were answering a call, the kind of call that doesn't come from a telegram or a shout, but from something much older and deeper, from a bond that existed before maps, before fences. The lead rider finally dismounted. He was tall, wrapped in a cloak of woven symbols, and his face bore lines carved by years and fire. Around his neck hung an amulet, shaped like a wolf's tooth, bound in copper. He approached Eli slowly, hand open, no weapon drawn. Then he knelt before the dog, placed a hand over its heart, and whispered a name Eli couldn't understand. The dog leaned in and closed its eyes. There was peace in that moment, raw, sacred, undeniable. The rider rose and faced Eli. "You brought back what was lost," he said in a voice like gravel and smoke. "And so the earth remembers you." That was all he said. No threats, no questions. He stepped back, mounted his horse, and with a single nod, turned his steed toward the dark hills. The rest of the warriors followed, forming a perfect circle around the ranch, once before galloping into the night, like a windstorm swallowed by moonlight. After they disappeared, the land felt different, quieter, like it had exhaled. Eli stood on his porch for hours, staring into the dark. The dog lay at his feet, calm, still watching the horizon. He didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, but because something sacred had walked through his world, and he wasn't sure he deserved it. Not after everything he'd seen. Not after all the years spent believing the West had forgotten what honor felt like. The next morning, he found a gift tied to his fence post. A satchel made of deerskin, inside it a single feather, a small clay figure of a dog, and a strip of rawhide etched with symbols. It wasn't a payment. It was a mark of remembrance, of bond, of trust. And from that day forward, the land around Eli Cooper's ranch changed. Coyotes never crossed it. Crops grew faster. Horses healed quicker. And folks started calling it blessed ground. But Eli knew better. It wasn't blessed. It was witnessed. And that made all the difference. The weeks that followed passed with a strange calm. Eli found himself rising earlier, working with a focus he hadn't known in years. The aches in his bones seemed less sharp. The cattle wandered closer to the homestead without fear, and the horses no longer flinched at distant thunder. But the biggest change was the dog. It never strayed far, always at Eli's side, watching him like a shadow with breath. It never barked, never growled again, just stood tall with quiet dignity, as if it was no longer just a creature of flesh, but a sentinel of something sacred. Neighbors started noticing. One by one, they'd stop at the gate, not to ask questions, but to feel something. "The wind smells different out here," one said. "Your cattle walk like they ain't afraid of nothing," said another. Eli just nodded and let them look. He knew words wouldn't explain it. How could he describe that moment on the porch? 50 warriors saluting a dog he had saved with nothing but warmth and broth. No, it wasn't for telling. It was for carrying. Late one evening, as the sun bled into the hills, the dog stood still as stone beside the barn. Its ears perked, and its head tilted toward the north. Eli followed its gaze, but saw nothing. No riders. No dust. Just the open field and wind. But something in his chest stirred, a pull he hadn't felt since that night. The next morning, he found fresh tracks near the watering hole. Hoof prints. 50. In perfect formation. As if they had passed through again, silently, unseen. That night, Eli built a small cairn beside the fire pit. Stones stacked carefully, one by one. No name carved into them. Just a marker, not for death, but for return. He placed the clay dog figure at the top and tied the rawhide strip around it. The dog sat beside him, watching every motion. When Eli finished, he whispered, "If they ever come back, they'll know I didn't forget." The dog blinked slowly, then laid its head on Eli's boot. They sat like that until the stars swallowed the sky. From that point on, Eli made a habit. Every month, on the same night, he lit a single lantern and placed it by the cairn. A signal, not a summoning, but a remembrance, a way of saying, I still see you. I still honor what happened here. And each time, though he never saw them again with his eyes, the earth would rumble softly underfoot, and 50 horses would pass through his dreams. One afternoon, a young boy from town wandered onto Eli's land, chasing a runaway calf. His name was Micah, small, curious, and bold in that innocent way only children could be. When Eli found him near the ridge, the dog was already sitting protectively between the boy and the woods. Micah didn't look scared. In fact, he was smiling. Your dog told me not to go further, he said, matter-of-factly. Eli raised a brow. He spoke to you. Micah nodded. Not with words, with eyes. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, sipping coffee gone cold, thinking about the boy, about how easily he had understood. No disbelief, no questioning, just trust. It made him wonder if that's what he'd lost in his own youth, that ability to accept the magic of the land without trying to make sense of it. Perhaps that's why the riders had come to him when they did, because he'd finally let go of needing to understand and simply chose to act. The dog, older now, moved slower. Its muzzle was graying, but its eyes were sharp as ever. Eli began writing in the evenings, small notes, journal entries, sketches of the night the riders arrived. Not to publish, not for anyone but himself. A record of something too sacred to speak aloud, yet too powerful to leave behind unwritten. He tucked the pages into a wooden box and placed it beneath the floorboard under his bed. For when the time is right, he whispered, the land remained untouched. Rain came when needed. The crops never failed, and no sickness touches livestock. Some tried to explain it. Water tables, climate, luck. But Eli knew. It was the result of something earned, not given. A debt repaid by a people who had once been forgotten by history, but remembered by the land. A pact sealed not with blood, but with kindness. And when Eli stood one last time by the cairn, hand resting on the dog's head, now slow with age, he didn't ask for anything. He just said, I'm still here. The dog looked up at him, then to the ridge. Somewhere out there, 50 riders waited, not for a command, not for a mission, but for remembrance. And as long as Eli Cooper breathed, they would never be forgotten. As the years wore on, Eli's body aged like leather, weathered but resilient. His hands, once firm and unshakable, now trembled slightly when he tied rope or cleaned his rifle. But his mind remained sharp, anchored by memories that didn't fade with time, only deepened. The dog, too, aged in tandem. Its pace slowed, its sleep lengthened. Yet every evening, without fail, it would rise and limp toward the cairn with Eli, pausing to stare out at the horizon, as if waiting for something or someone. The townsfolk began to speak of the ranch as something otherworldly, a place where storms split to avoid the crops, where injured animals wandered in and left days later, healed and calm. They never saw the riders, never heard the hooves, but they felt something. Travelers often stopped at Eli's gate, drawn by a pull they couldn't name. Many left gifts, feathers, beads, carved wooden animals. Not because Eli asked, but because the land asked. Then came the night the dog didn't rise. It lay beside Eli's bed, breathing shallowly, gaze fixed on the door. Eli sat beside it, stroking its fur, whispering old words that didn't belong to any book, but came from the wind and fire of memory. You stayed longer than you had to, he said, longer than I deserved. The dog's tail thumped once, slow and soft, and with a final breath that shook the air, it was gone. Eli didn't bury in the yard. He carried the body with reverence to the cairn, where he dug gently until the earth gave way. He wrapped it in the old rawhide satchel, placed the clay figure at its side, and covered it stone by stone. That night, the wind howled like it hadn't in years. Not angry, not wild, but grieving. And somewhere in the distance, 50 horses stirred beneath a moonless sky. In the days that followed, Eli grew quieter. He spoke less, ate less. But when he walked with pride, not as a man alone, but as one who had kept a promise. He began carving again, filling his shelves with small totems. Wolves, horses, warriors. He left them along the fence line and by the watering hole, never saying why. But those who visited knew. They were offerings, not to gods, not to ghosts, but to a truth older than any scripture. That loyalty, once given freely, echoes far beyond the life that gave it. One morning, near the end of harvest, Eli didn't open the barn. The lantern remained unlit, the horses unfed. A neighbor named Harlan rode up to check on him and found the door ajar, coffee on the stove untouched, and the rocker on the porch gently swaying. Inside, Eli lay in bed, hands folded across his chest, the wooden box tucked under one arm, and a small smile resting on his face. There was no fear, no pain, just peace, like a man who had finally heard the last hoofbeat. The funeral was small. Harlan buried him beneath the old cedar beside the cairn, where the soil was rich and the wind sang low. No preacher, no sermon, just a circle of quiet folk who knew better than to speak too loud near sacred ground. Someone placed the last wooden carving Eli had made, a rider with a dog at his side, at the headstone. No name was etched, only a phrase, carved deep and clean. He remembered. That night, those still at the ranch heard it, not in their ears but in their bones. The deep, rhythmic thunder of hooves. Not wild, not hurried, but honoring. And for the first time in decades, they were seen, 50 warriors, cloaked in the mist of the moon, forming a circle around the cairn. At their center stood the dog, strong and whole again, eyes aglow. Behind him, a rider dismounted. Eli, younger now, unburdened. And when he raised his hand to the sky, the wind itself seemed to bow. Then they vanished, not into the woods, but into the land, as if the ground itself had opened to welcome them home. And what remained was stillness, not emptiness, fulfillment, the kind of silence that only comes when something eternal has been completed, not ended. Since that day, no fence post ever rotted on Eli's ranch, no horse ever limped, and no child who wandered near the cairn ever felt alone, because the land still holds their names, still carries their vow, the rancher and the dog, the kindness and the thunder. And if you ever feel the earth tremble beneath your boots, don't be afraid. Just listen, they still ride. Time moved on, as it always does, but the ranch remained untouched by the slow erosion that steals memory from most places. The trees didn't wither, the soil stayed rich, and travelers still came, drawn by stories that refused to die. Some arrived out of curiosity, others by coincidence, but all of them left changed. They couldn't quite explain it, but something in the wind made their breath catch, their pulse slow, as if they had entered a place that was watching them, kindly but intently. Children, especially, felt it. They'd run to the cairn as if pulled by invisible threads, pressing their small palms to the stones like greeting an old friend. Parents followed, hesitant at first, until they, too, felt it, a hush in the soul, a sense that someone or something remembered them. A few even claimed they heard hoofbeats at night, far off, always in perfect rhythm. And though no one ever saw the riders again with open eyes, the land spoke in other ways. During a great fire season, when flames swept across nearby hills like a storm of teeth, the blaze came within inches of the Cooper Ranch and stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Fire crews were baffled. Like the wind shifted all at once, one man said. Like something told the flames, not here. Locals nodded. They knew. It wasn't luck. It was guardianship. A promise still being kept. Years turned to decades. The cabin eventually fell to time. The roof caved, the porch sagged. But no one dared clear it. It stood as it was, overgrown with wildflowers and ivy, a temple born of cedar and memory. And in the center of the clearing, the cairn remained. Clean, untouched, no moss, no erosion. Just the stones, perfectly stacked, and a wooden figure always standing on top. A fresh one, as if carved anew each year, though no one claimed the work. And so the legend grew, not through headlines or monuments, but through whispered retellings around fire pits and in journals tucked beneath bedrolls. Of a man who saved a dying dog without question. Of warriors who answered not to gold or vengeance, but to honor repaid. And of a bond so pure, so unwavering, that the earth itself changed its shape to hold it. One cold autumn, a young woman named Liza, a distant relative from a branch of the Cooper family tree, made her way to the ridge. She had heard the stories growing up, always doubted them, always smiled politely when old men spoke of riders in the night. But something in her life had broken, a silence that begged for meaning, for anchoring. So she came, not expecting miracles, just hoping for a whisper of clarity. The ranch was almost gone. Only bones of the cabin remained, half sunk into the ground. But the cairn was exactly as the stories described. She approached, unsure of what to do, but the moment her hand brushed the stones, a wave of warmth passed through her chest. Not heat, but recognition. As if someone had just said, "There you are." And in that stillness, she wept. Not for sorrow, but for remembrance. That night, she slept beneath the stars, no tent, no fire, just open sky. And sometime near midnight, she awoke to a sound, distant hooves. She sat up, heart pounding, eyes straining through the dark. And there, standing at the ridge, was a figure, a man in a wide-brimmed hat, with a dog by his side. He raised his hand once, then vanished as mist rolled through the grass. In her palm, when she awoke at dawn, was a small clay carving. A rider and a dog. New, dry, warm. Liza didn't stay in the valley. She left, but she took something with her that no thief could steal. Purpose. And from that day forward, she carved. Every week, small wooden totems of horses, of dogs, of watchful warriors. She left them in libraries, on windowsills, in alleyways and quiet park benches. Never explaining, just planting memory like seeds. And wherever those figures went, strange things followed. Healing, forgiveness, courage. Because some stories are not meant to be kept. They're meant to ride on. Through us. Through kindness. Through silent courage when no one is watching. Eli Cooper didn't save the dog for reward. The riders didn't come for glory. And the land didn't bless them because of who they were, but because of what they chose to do when no one else would. And in that choice, the world changed. Forever. The tale of Eli Cooper and the dog he saved became more than legend. It became a compass for lost souls. Travelers would come from far places just to sit by the cairn, saying nothing, leaving behind pieces of their burdens in the form of tokens. Notes, feathers, lockets, or hand-carved wood. Some came searching for healing, others for forgiveness, and a few just to remember someone who had passed. But all of them felt it. That unseen presence, that hush in the chest that only sacred ground can stir. There were stories of soldiers with broken minds who sat at the edge of the field and left whole. Of mothers who came with grief too heavy to carry, and left with peace as quiet as rain. And one account told of a drifter who arrived to end his life, but found a carved figure on his pillow instead, a rider and a dog, just like the others. He left the next morning, with light in his eyes and no farewell. The world would call it coincidence. The valley called it remembrance. One day, a great storm struck the region. Winds flattened barns. Lightning tore trees from their roots. But when it reached the Cooper land, the clouds split. The rain came softly, like a blessing instead of curse. Those watching from town stood in silence as the storm curved around the ridge like water flowing around a stone. Some said they saw riders in the clouds. Others whispered of a dog's howl echoing in the wind, low, loyal, and clear as church bells. Liza returned often, never staying long, but always leaving something behind. She never told people what she saw that night on the ridge, but her hands kept carving, and her spirit never wavered. One year, she returned with her newborn son and placed a small carving in his hand. "You won't remember this," she whispered, "but one day, you'll feel it. And when the time comes, you'll know what to do." That's how legends stay alive, not through bloodlines, but through actions passed in silence. And so the rhythm continued. The land remained whole. The cairn remained untouched. And though the cabin faded, and the names of those who once rode it faded from paper, the truth lived on in every act of quiet grace. Because the West never forgets what love has carved into its soil. And when the night is still and the stars are wide, the hoofbeats return, not to chase, not to conquer, but to guard what was once given freely. The ride never ended. It simply moved on, to the next one willing to kneel beside a dying life and say, "You matter." Years turned into generations, and still the ridge stood proud. Trees grew tall, wildflowers bloomed in impossible places, and the air never lost its hush. People stopped calling it Eli Cooper's Land and began calling it the Riders Hollow. No one changed the name officially. No plaques or signs were ever posted. But everyone knew. Even maps, oddly, left the land blank, as if it existed in a space between the known and the sacred. Elders taught their grandchildren the story, not from books, but from memory. There was once a man who saved a dog. They'd begin. But the children always knew the next line. And the dog saved the man right back. Then came the rest, the warriors, the hooves, the vow. And though each telling carried slight differences, the heart of it never changed. Because truth doesn't weaken with retelling, it grows stronger. In nearby towns, people began to carve totems of their own. Small altars sprang up beside rivers, behind stables, near graveyards. Not to worship, but to remember. And always, there was the figure of the dog. Loyalty, trust, protection. It became a symbol, unspoken but deeply felt. When a child was born, a wooden rider was placed in their crib. When someone passed, one was tucked into their coat. Not superstition, respect. One bitter winter, a boy was lost in the hills during a storm. Search parties failed to find him. But 3 days later, he walked out of the forest, barefoot and smiling, holding a carved dog in one hand. A man with a hat told me where the sun would rise, he said, and his dog made the storm quiet. No one questioned him, because the West knows. It remembers what the world forgets. That miracles don't always look like fire from heaven. Sometimes, they look like a worn-out rancher kneeling beside a broken body and choosing kindness. And so, when the night grows still and the moon hangs low, you might hear it too, the soft thunder of 50 hooves in the distance, a wind that carries more than dust, and the watchful eyes of something loyal, waiting just beyond the firelight. Don't be afraid. Just listen. And remember, they still ride. Some stories don't end. They echo. The tale of Eli Cooper wasn't about a dog, a ranch, or even the riders who thundered through the night. It was about what happens when one man, faced with a life that others would have ignored, chooses compassion without hesitation. In a land where survival often hardens the soul, Eli proved that mercy still has power. And the West, wild and watching, did not let that act go unnoticed. Throughout this journey, we saw how a single decision created ripples that crossed generations, healed broken spirits, and turned one quiet patch of earth into sacred ground. We saw how the smallest gesture, a warm bowl, a safe hand, called forth warriors from the dark. Not to take, not to punish, but to honor. Because in a world that forgets too quickly, this story dared to remember. And now, that memory lives on in you. If it stirred something in your chest, a sense of wonder, a lump in your throat, a spark of quiet courage, then let it guide you beyond this screen. Let it remind you that the good we give, even when no one is watching, may one day return on 50 hooves beneath the stars. Not every act of kindness brings thunder, but some are loud in ways only the soul can hear. So ask yourself, what are you leaving behind? What gestures, what love, what loyalty? Because the land may seem silent, but it listens. And somewhere out there, beneath the dust and wind, are forces waiting to answer those who give without demand. The riders don't come for glory. They come for those who remember what it means to care. If this story moved you, take a moment to share that feeling. Subscribe to the channel so these legends keep riding forward. Like the video if you felt the earth tremble beneath the tale, and tell us in the comments, what will you remember most? Because when we speak these stories aloud, when we carry them forward, the ride never ends. It only grows stronger.